The metal screamed as the car spun off the road, and for 3 long seconds, Daniel Carter thought he was about to die in front of his boss. When the world finally stopped shaking, he turned to check on her and found Victoria Hayes gripping his arm so hard her knuckles had gone white. She looked at him like she had never looked at anyone before. Then she whispered the words that would follow them both for the rest of their lives. "Don't tell anyone about this." Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you believe the quiet ones carry the heaviest hearts, hit subscribe, because tonight's story is for you. The car hit the ice at 60 miles an hour, and the back end went first. Daniel felt it before he understood it, a sickening lightness, the tires losing their grip on the world, the steering wheel suddenly meaning nothing in his hands. He heard Victoria Hayes suck in a breath beside him. He heard himself say her name once sharp like that alone might hold the car steady. It didn't. The Range Rover slid sideways across 2 empty lanes of Route 20, spun a full half circle, and slammed backward into the guardrail with a crunch that Daniel felt in his teeth. The airbags didn't deploy, the impact wasn't square enough, but his head snapped against the window hard enough to make the world flash white for a second, and then everything went still. Snow kept falling like nothing had happened at all. "Victoria," his voice came out rough. "Victoria, look at me." She didn't answer right away. Her hands were still locked on the dashboard, her knuckles bloodless, her breath coming in short, ragged pulls. Daniel reached over, not thinking about the fact that she was his boss, not thinking about anything except that she wasn't answering, and put 2 fingers under her chin, turning her face toward his. "Hey, eyes on me." Her eyes finally found his, wide, wet, furious with fear. "I'm fine," she said too fast. "I'm fine, is the car? I don't know yet." He kept his voice even, the same voice he used at 3 in the morning when his daughter woke up crying from a nightmare. "Calm first. Answers second." "Can you move your legs?" She moved them. Winced. Nodded. "Arms." She lifted both, shaking, and nodded again. "Okay." Daniel exhaled. "Okay, good. That's good." He turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, and died. He tried again. Nothing but a dry click, like the car itself had given up. He sat back, hands still on the wheel, and stared through the windshield at a wall of white that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. "Try your phone," he said. Victoria was already digging in her bag, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline. She pulled out her phone, thumbed it awake, held it up toward the window, like that would summon a signal out of nowhere. "No bars." Her voice cracked on the last word. "No bars, Daniel, there's nothing." "Mine either." He'd already checked. 1 bar flickering in and out, then gone. "It's the storm. It's knocking out the towers." "So what do we do?" He didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was he didn't know, and lying to her felt worse than silence. He looked out at the snow again. It wasn't falling anymore. It was being thrown sideways in sheets, the wind screaming across the open field on either side of the road like something alive and angry. There were no other headlights, no streetlights, nothing but the 2 of them, a dead car, and 40 miles of nothing in every direction. "We wait," he said finally. "Someone will notice we're not back. Frank knows what route we took." Frank left the office at 5. Then his wife will make him check his phone eventually. It wasn't funny. Victoria didn't laugh, but something in her shoulders loosened half an inch, like she'd needed permission to not panic, and he'd just handed it to her. He tried the engine 1 more time. Nothing. He checked the dashboard lights dimming, which meant the battery was draining even with the engine off, some short somewhere from the impact. He killed everything except the hazards, watching the orange light blink weakly against the snow. And then even that felt like too much of a risk, so he shut it off too. Darkness folded in around them. "Daniel." Victoria's voice was smaller in the dark. "How cold does it get out here? Cold enough that we don't want to find out?" He heard her breath catch again, and this time he didn't reach for her chin. He reached for the back seat instead, twisting around to grab the emergency kit he'd insisted on keeping in every company vehicle. The one half the executives complained was a waste of trunk space. 2 thermal blankets, a flashlight, a road flare, a half-melted granola bar. It wasn't much. It was something. "You keep an emergency kit," Victoria said, watching him pull it out. It wasn't quite a question. "I keep an emergency kit in every car I drive." He shook out one of the blankets, the foil surface catching what little light was left, and held it out to her. "Wrap this around your shoulders." "What about you?" "I've got the other one." "Daniel." She didn't take it. "You're not wearing a coat." He looked down at himself like he was noticing for the first time. He'd left his jacket in the back to keep his hands free while loading the site photos, and now it was somewhere under a stack of folders he couldn't see in the dark. He shrugged. "I run hot." "That's not—" She stopped herself. Exhaled, tried again, quieter. "Take the blanket, please. You're the one in a blazer with no sleeves under it." "I have a coat in the back." "Then get your coat and I'll take the blanket." He was already draping it over her shoulders as he said it, tucking the edge in against the cold coming through the window seam. "Don't argue with me about this. I do this for a living. You're a logistics coordinator, not a paramedic." "I'm a single dad," he said, and something in his own voice surprised him, how easily it came out, how automatic. "Cold nights and no backup is basically my resume." For a second, Victoria just looked at him, really looked the way people don't usually look at the person who books their conference rooms and reroutes their shipments when a supplier falls through. Like she was seeing him for the first time in 3 years of him working 2 floors below her office. "How old is she?" Victoria asked. "Your daughter?" 8. "What's her name?" Emma." Victoria pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but her eyes didn't leave him. "Does she know you're out here?" "She knows I had a work trip. She doesn't know we're stuck on the side of the highway in a blizzard, if that's what you're asking." He managed a small, tired smile. "I'd like to keep it that way, if this whole thing works out fine, which it will." "You sound very sure." "I have to sound sure. It's part of the job description, too." The wind hit the car hard enough to rock it, and Victoria flinched, grabbing for the door handle like the car itself might tip. Daniel put a hand flat against the dashboard, steadying nothing, really just needing to do something with his hands. "It's not going anywhere," he said. "It's heavy enough. We're fine." "You keep saying fine." "Would you rather I said something else?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the snow slam sideways against the glass. "I'd rather you told me the truth." Daniel considered that. Considered her this woman who ran a 400-employee logistics company like she'd been born holding a spreadsheet, who Daniel had seen reduce senior directors to stammering apologies in quarterly reviews, who was now sitting 2 feet away from him with a thermal blanket pulled up to her chin, looking about 20 years younger than the woman who'd signed his last performance review. "The truth," he said, "is that we're going to be cold, and it's going to be a long night, and there's a decent chance we don't get rescued until morning. But we're not going to freeze to death in a company Range Rover 40 minutes outside Chicago. That's not how this ends." "How do you know?" "Because I've survived worse nights than this one." He said it simply, without weight, but something about the way he said it made Victoria go still. "Worse than this?" He didn't answer that yet. Instead, he reached for the door handle. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice sharpened real fear in it now. "Checking something. I'll be 30 seconds. Daniel, it's a blizzard out there, which is exactly why I need to check the trunk before the wind buries it shut." He was already pulling the collar of his shirt up, bracing. "There's a flare kit back there and a tow strap. If the snowplows run this route at all tonight, a flare on the guardrail is the difference between them seeing us and driving right past us." "Then I'm coming too." "No, you're staying in the car where it's 20 degrees warmer than it is out there." He looked at her steady. "I need you to trust me on this one. Please." She didn't answer, but she didn't argue either, which he took as the closest thing to agreement he was going to get. He shoved the door open against the wind. It actually fought him like the storm had a grudge and stepped out into a world that swallowed him whole. The cold hit like a wall. Not cold the way Chicago winters were usually cold-biting, but familiar. This was something else, something that found the gaps in his clothes in seconds and went straight for bone. He kept one hand on the car, feeling his way along the frozen metal toward the trunk. Snow already stinging his eyes, his breath torn out of his mouth the second it left him. Inside the car, Victoria watched his shape blur into the white, and for a moment, one terrible disorienting moment, she couldn't see him at all. "Daniel!" Her voice didn't carry far in that wind. She pressed her face to the window, scanning until she caught the dark shape of him again, hunched at the back of the car, fighting the trunk latch with hands that had to be going numb. It took him almost 2 full minutes. It felt to both of them like 20. When he finally wrenched the trunk open, the wind nearly tore it out of his grip, and he had to brace his whole body against it just to keep it from slamming shut on his fingers. He found the flare kit by feel, more than sight, jammed it under one arm, grabbed the toe strap out of pure instinct, in case they needed it later, and slammed the trunk shut before the storm could take anything else from him. He didn't light the flare yet. Better to wait and use it when there was actually a chance of headlights. He'd decide that later, warmer thinking straight, but he wedged it into the door pocket where he could reach it fast. And then he was fighting his way back to the driver's door, and Victoria was already leaning across the console to shove it open from the inside before he even reached the handle. He fell more than climbed back into his seat. The door slammed. The wind howled outside like it was furious he'd gotten away. "You're shaking," Victoria said, and before he could tell her he was fine, she'd already pulled her half of the blanket toward him, draping it over his shoulder, without asking permission this time. "Don't argue with me about this." He almost laughed at hearing his own words handed back to him. "Copy that. Was it worth it freezing half to death for a flare? Ask me in 6 hours when it's the only thing that gets a plow driver to stop." He was still catching his breath, his hands raw and red even in the dim light. "It's there. That's what matters." "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." He said it simply, no drama in it. "There's a version of tonight where nobody notices this car until spring thaw. I'd rather not find out if that version is true." Victoria didn't say anything to that. She just sat there for a moment, watching him rub warmth back into his hands, and something in her face had changed again. The fear from a minute ago, folding into something else. Something that looked almost like awe, though she'd never have called it that out loud. "We should conserve the flashlight battery," he said instead, once his breathing had evened out. "And talk. Talking keeps people alert. Falling asleep in the cold is the thing you actually don't want to do. You really do this for a living." "I read a lot of safety manuals. Comes with logistics." Victoria pulled her knees up onto the seat, tucking them under the blanket, making herself small in a way Daniel doubted anyone at Sterling Logistics had ever seen. Board members didn't see this Victoria. Investors didn't see this Victoria. He wondered briefly if anyone did. "Ask me something," she said suddenly. "Since we're supposed to talk." "Anything. Anything except my Q3 numbers. I've had enough of those this week." He almost laughed. It surprised him that there was still a laugh in him out here in this. "Okay. Why'd you take the site visit yourself? You could have sent anyone." "I wanted to see the property before the acquisition went through. I don't trust photographs." That's the professional answer. What other kind is there? The real one. She looked at him sideways, and for a second he thought she'd deflect the way executives always deflected, circling back to something safe. Instead, she surprised him. "I don't like sitting in my office," she said. "I built this company so I wouldn't have to answer to anyone, and now I spend 90% of my life in a room answering to everyone. Boards, investors, lawyers. Sometimes I take a site visit just to remember what the company actually does. And what does it do? Moves things from where they are to where they're supposed to be." She said it flatly, like a line from a pitch deck she'd repeated too many times. Then quieter. "I used to think that was a good metaphor for my life. Lately, I'm not sure I've moved anywhere at all." You built a 400-person company from nothing. That's not exactly standing still. My father built a hardware store from nothing. He used to say that too, that the work would mean something eventually if you just kept moving. She looked out at the snow. He died before he ever got to see mine go public. I used to think that was the tragedy of it. Now I think the actual tragedy is that I've spent 9 years chasing a version of success he never got to define for me, because he died before I figured out I didn't have to build it exactly the way he would have. What would he think of it now, the company? I have no idea. Her voice caught just slightly. That's the part nobody tells you about grief. You spend the rest of your life making decisions for a person who isn't there to tell you if you got it right. Daniel didn't say anything right away. He'd learned over the years that silence was sometimes the only honest response to another person's honesty. That rushing to fill it usually meant you weren't really listening. So he let it sit, the wind screaming outside, the cold creeping in through the door seams, and after a moment, Victoria spoke again, like the silence itself had loosened something in her. Can I ask you something now? Fair's fair. Why do you never take vacation days? The question landed harder than he expected. He'd forgotten for a second that she paid attention to things like that somewhere in the machinery of running a company, someone had noticed his HR file, his unused PTO stacking up year after year like evidence of something. I don't need them, he said. Everyone needs them. I have a kid who needs braces in 2 years and a mortgage that doesn't care how tired I am. Vacation days don't pay for either of those things. You could take the days without going anywhere. Just stop. For a week. Stopping isn't free either. He heard the edge in his own voice and pulled it back, softened it. If I stop, I start thinking. And thinking isn't always... He stopped himself. Isn't always what? He looked out the window instead of at her. The snow had eased slightly, just enough that he could make out the shape of the guardrail a few feet away, silver under what little moonlight made it through the clouds. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. Car accident. Icy road, actually. Kind of like this one if I let myself think about it too hard, which is why I try not to. Victoria went very still. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. Nobody at the office knows. I don't put it on my LinkedIn. He tried for lightness and mostly missed. Sarah was driving Emma home from a birthday party. Another car ran a light. Emma was in the back seat. She walked away with a broken wrist and 6 weeks of nightmares. Sarah didn't walk away at all. Daniel, you asked why I don't take vacation days. He kept his eyes on the guardrail, on the snow, on anything that wasn't Victoria's face right now, because he could feel it, the particular kind of attention that made people say things they didn't usually say out loud. If I stop moving, I start remembering. And if I start remembering, I start being useless to the one person who actually needs me to be functional, so I don't stop. I work. I pick Emma up from school, I make dinner, I help with homework, I go to bed, and I do it again the next day. That's the whole operation. It runs because I don't ask it to do anything it can't handle. Was there ever a night it didn't run, where it broke even a little? Daniel exhaled a long breath that fogged in the cold air of the car. 1. About 4 months after the funeral. Emma had a nightmare, wanted to know why Mommy didn't come home, and I didn't have an answer that made sense to a 5-year-old, so I just held her until she fell back asleep, and then I sat in the hallway outside her door until it got light out. Didn't cry, didn't sleep, just sat there. In the morning I made her pancakes like nothing happened, because that's the job. Nobody warns you that grief doesn't get a day off just because your kid still needs breakfast. That's not weakness, Daniel, sitting in that hallway. I know that now. Took me a while. The car was quiet, except for the wind. Victoria had pulled the blanket up higher, but she wasn't looking away from him now. If anything, she'd turned more fully toward him, like she'd forgotten for a moment to keep the careful distance a boss keeps from an employee. That's not sustainable, she said finally. It's been 3 years. Feels pretty sustainable to me. It's not the same thing. No, he admitted. It's probably not. Does anyone check on you family friends? My sister calls on Sundays. My mother-in-law helps with Emma sometimes when she's not working her own shifts. He shrugged a small, tired motion. People check on Emma. That's how it should be. She's the one who lost her mother. You lost your wife. I lost my wife, Daniel repeated slowly, like he was testing whether the words still fit right in his mouth after 3 years. But I still get to be here. Some nights that feels like the whole difference I'm still here, so I don't really get to fall apart. Falling apart is a luxury for people who don't have an 8-year-old asking them to check under the bed for monsters. Victoria's eyes were bright in the dark, and Daniel realized with a small jolt that she was close to crying this woman who had once told an entire boardroom that sentiment was a liability in negotiations, who Daniel had watched dismantle a hostile takeover attempt with nothing but a spreadsheet and a look on her face like ice. I had no idea, she said quietly. 3 years and I had no idea. You weren't supposed to. I don't exactly bring it up in status meetings. Still, I should have... She stopped, shook her head. I should have known my own employee was carrying something like that. You run a 400-person company. You can't know everyone's whole life. I could know yours. You drive for me. You've driven for me a dozen times this year. I never once asked you a single question about your family that wasn't small talk. You're asking now, only because we're trapped in a car and might freeze to death. A ghost of a smile, dark and self-aware. Not exactly the ideal circumstances for getting to know your employees better. I don't know. Feels like it's working. That got a real laugh out of her short, surprised, like it had escaped before she could decide whether to allow it. It was a good sound. Daniel found himself wanting to hear it again, which struck him as a strange thing to want, given the circumstances, given who she was, given everything. Your turn, he said. Since we're doing this. What's the real reason you never talk about yourself? Victoria's smile faded, replaced by something more careful. She looked down at her hands, at the blanket bunched in her fists. Because the version of me that people respect isn't the version that talks about herself, she said. The moment I say something vulnerable in a meeting, I stop being the CEO and start being the woman running the company. And those two things get treated very differently, even now, even after everything I've built. That sounds exhausting. It is. She let out a breath. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, none of that would matter anymore. I'd just be good at my job, respected on the merits. But it doesn't work that way. The higher I climb, the more careful I have to be about looking like I climbed it without needing anything from anyone. Do you need anything from anyone? The question hung there longer than he meant it to. I don't know anymore, Victoria said finally. I used to have people, a fiancé actually back before the company took off the way it did. Michael, he left 3 years into it, said he felt like he was married to a spreadsheet. A short, humorless laugh. He wasn't wrong, honestly. I gave the company everything I had left over after giving nothing to him. What happened exactly, if you don't mind me asking? There wasn't a dramatic ending. That's almost the worst part. No affair, no big fight. Just a Tuesday night where he sat me down and said he'd been trying to get my attention for 2 years and had finally accepted he wasn't going to. He wasn't cruel about it. He was just tired. Told me I'd built a company that could run without him, and somewhere along the way, I'd started running my life the same way. She wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. I told him he was wrong. Then I went to a 9 a.m. meeting the next day and didn't call in sick, didn't take the morning, didn't do anything a normal person does after their engagement ends. I just went to work, which in hindsight kind of proved his entire point. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something useful that I could survive on my own, that I didn't need to build my life around being needed by someone. She glanced at him. You built your whole life around being needed by someone. Emma needs you, so you show up every single day, no matter how tired you are. I used to think that kind of thing was a weakness. Watching you tonight, I'm starting to think I had it backward. Daniel didn't know what to say to that, so for a while he said nothing, and they sat there together in the cold and the dark. Two people who ran in completely different circles inside the same company, suddenly closer than they'd ever been in 3 years of nodding at each other in hallways. The wind kept howling. The temperature kept dropping. Daniel checked his phone again, still nothing. One bar flickering and vanishing before it could connect to anything. "We should try to get some rest," he said eventually. "Take turns staying awake if we can manage it. I'll go first." "You don't have to do that. I can stay awake." "You've had a longer day than me. Site visits, board calls, before that probably didn't eat lunch." "How would you know I didn't eat lunch?" "Because I scheduled your calendar for 11 months before you hired an assistant, and old habits die hard. You never eat lunch on inspection days." Something shifted in her face, surprise, and underneath it, something warmer. "You remember that?" "I remember a lot of things. It's part of the job, too." She was quiet for a moment, studying him in the dim light, like she was trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the employee she thought she knew. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the blanket, and the flare, and for not making this feel as terrifying as it actually is." "It is pretty terrifying," Daniel admitted. "I'm just better at hiding it than you are." "That obvious?" "You've been gripping that door handle for the last 10 minutes like it's the only thing keeping the car on the ground." Victoria looked down, realized he was right, and slowly, deliberately let go. For a while, neither of them spoke. The storm outside hadn't let up. If anything, it had grown louder, the wind finding some new pitch to scream through snow, packing itself against the passenger window until the glass turned solid white. Daniel kept one eye on the horizon. Whenever the wind died down, enough to see anything at all, watching for headlights that didn't come for the particular color of emergency lights against snow, that he knew from experience took hours to arrive on back roads like this one. He thought about Emma, about the babysitter, his neighbor Mrs. Alvarez, a retired schoolteacher who'd watched Emma more nights than Daniel liked to admit, telling her it was just a work trip, that Daddy would be home for breakfast. He thought about the promise he'd made to Emma the morning he left, crouched down at her level in the kitchen, her hair still messy from sleep. "I'll be back before you're even up for school," he'd told her. Pinky promise. She'd hooked her small finger around his and studied his face with the particular seriousness only an 8-year-old could manage. "You always keep pinky promises." Always. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. He'd never broken a pinky promise, not once in 3 years of being the only parent standing between Emma and a world that had already taken too much from her. He didn't intend to start tonight, but the wind outside didn't seem to care what he intended. And for the first time since the car had spun off the road, a thought crept in that he didn't let himself finish. What if this was the one he couldn't keep? "You went somewhere," Victoria said quietly, watching him. "Just thinking about my daughter." "Tell me about her. Not the sad parts. Just her. What's she like?" And something about the way Victoria asked it gently, like she actually wanted to know and wasn't just filling silence, made Daniel talk, really talk, in a way he hadn't let himself in years. "She's fierce," he said, and a small smile found its way onto his face despite everything. "Stubborn as anything. Wants to be a marine biologist, then an astronaut, then a marine biologist again, depending on the week. She still sleeps with a stuffed whale her mother bought her, even though she'll swear up and down to her friends she's too old for it. She corrects my grammar. She's better at math than I am, and she knows it, and she is not humble about it. She sounds incredible." "She is." His voice thickened slightly. "She's the reason I get up every morning. Some days, she's the only reason. I know that's not supposed to be a healthy thing to say out loud, that a parent isn't supposed to build their entire will to live around one small person, but some nights, that's just the truth of it." "I don't think that's unhealthy," Victoria said. "I think that's just love in its rawest form. I've never had anything close to that kind of reason. Not the company. Not Michael in the end. I used to envy people who had it, and then I told myself I didn't because envy felt weaker than ambition." "You still have time." "Do I? I'm 32, running a company that eats 60 hours of my week minimum, and the last man I let close enough to matter told me I was better suited to spreadsheets than relationships." She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "I'm not exactly leading candidate material for anyone's Emma." "You'd be surprised," Daniel said before he could stop himself, and then immediately wished he could take it back, not because it wasn't true, but because of how true it felt the moment it left his mouth. Victoria looked at him for a long moment in the dark, like she was trying to decide if he meant it the way it sounded. "Daniel." Her voice cut through the quiet, careful in a way it hadn't been a moment ago. "Can I tell you something? And you have to promise not to think less of me for it." "I don't think I could at this point." She didn't smile at that. Her face had changed the openness from a few minutes ago, folding into something tighter, more guarded, like a door easing shut. "When we get out of here," she said, "when this is over, and we're both fine, and back at the office on Monday, I need you to not tell anyone about tonight." Daniel blinked. "About the accident, Victoria, people are going to notice the car's totaled. Frank's going to ask what happened, not the accident." She shook her head, and he could hear something fraying in her voice, something that hadn't been there a second ago. "The rest of it, what I told you. About my father, about Michael leaving, about feeling like nobody needs—" She stopped herself, started over quieter. "If this gets back to the office, if the board hears that I sat in a stranded car and cried in front of an employee about my personal life, they will use it. Not maliciously necessarily, but they will use it because that's what people do with a woman who shows one crack in the armor. I've spent 9 years building a reputation that one night in a snowstorm could unravel in an afternoon of gossip. Victoria, I'm not going to tell anyone anything. I need you to actually mean that." "I mean it." He turned toward her fully, now made sure she was looking at him when he said it. "What happens in this car stays in this car. You have my word." She studied his face for a long moment, like she was trying to decide whether his word was worth trusting, and then something in her seemed to settle, seemed to believe him because she nodded once sharply and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Don't tell anyone about this," she said again, quieter this time, almost to herself. "Please." "I already said I wouldn't, and I know. I needed to hear myself say it again." Her voice had dropped to something almost fragile. "I don't know why it matters so much to me. It's just one night." But Daniel was already starting to understand, sitting there in the freezing dark watching this woman who ran a company with an iron grip come slowly apart at the seams over the fear of being seen as human, that it wasn't just one night. Not to her. And somewhere underneath his own exhaustion, his own worry about Emma waking up to an empty house, a different thought had started to take root. One he didn't have the energy yet to examine too closely. He didn't know her, not really. 3 years of scheduling her calendar and driving her to inspections didn't add up to knowing someone. And yet in the space of a few hours, trapped on the side of a dead highway, in a blizzard that showed no sign of breaking, Daniel Carter had learned more about Victoria Hayes than he'd learned in 3 years of working 2 floors beneath her office, and something about that fact sat heavier in his chest than the cold ever could. The wind slammed into the car again hard enough to rattle the windows, and in the sudden silence that followed, Victoria reached over without a word and pulled part of his blanket toward her, closing the distance between them by inches until their shoulders were nearly touching in the dark. Neither of them said anything about it. Neither of them pulled away. Then, far off so far, Daniel almost convinced himself he'd imagined it, a pinprick of light broke the white. He sat up straight. "Victoria, look." She followed his gaze, squinting through the storm. Somewhere down the long, dark stretch of Route 20, a set of headlights was moving faint and yellow, sweeping slowly across the snow, the way a plow's would. "Is that—" Her breath caught. "Daniel, is that them? Could be a plow. Could be a truck that has nothing to do with us." He was already reaching for the door for the flare kit wedged in the pocket. "I'm going to light it. Stay here, keep the door cracked so I can get back in fast." He was out into the cold again before she could argue, snow whipping around him as he struck the flare against the guardrail, watching the flame catch and flare red against all that white. He held it up high, waving it in slow arcs, watching the distant lights for any sign they'd turned, any sign they'd seen. They didn't turn. The lights kept moving along whatever road they were on. Not their road, Daniel realized with a drop in his stomach, some access road further out running parallel, and then curving away, swallowed by the storm as quickly as they'd appeared. He stood there another few seconds, flare burning down toward his fingers, refusing to believe it until the light was gone completely, and there was nothing left but snow and dark and the sound of his own ragged breathing. He climbed back into the car empty-handed, the flare guttering out in the snow behind him. "It wasn't them," Victoria said quietly. It wasn't a question. No. He pulled the door shut, shutting the wind back out, shutting the two of them back into the small, cold, fragile space that was for now the only safe place either of them had. Not yet. Victoria didn't say anything. She just reached over in the dark and found his cold fingers closing around his and held on. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the guardrail, burying the road, burying every trace that two people had ever driven this way at all, and somewhere out past the white. Real headlights, the ones that would actually find them, were still hours from arriving. Though neither of them knew that yet. Sitting there in the cold, holding on to a secret that had only just been born. The car's dashboard light flickered once and went dark for good, and in that sudden black, Victoria's grip on Daniel's hand tightened hard enough to hurt. "Daniel." Her voice had lost its steadiness. "Daniel, what just happened?" "Battery's dead. That's all." He kept his voice level, even though his own pulse had spiked. "No more hazards, no more dash lights. We still have the flashlight if we need it." "It's so dark." "I know. I can't see you. I'm right here." He found her other hand in the dark and held both, now anchoring her the way he anchored Emma during thunderstorms, steady pressure, no sudden movement. "I haven't gone anywhere. I'm not going anywhere." Her breathing slowed gradually, matching some rhythm he hadn't realized he was setting until she caught it. A minute passed, then two. The wind outside hadn't eased at all. If anything, it had found a new higher pitch, screaming through some gap in the guardrail that made a sound like a kettle that never quite reached its boil. "Talk to me," Victoria said. "Please. I don't care about what. Just talk." "About what?" "Anything. Your commute, your coffee order. I don't care. I just need to hear a voice that isn't the wind." So he talked. He told her about the gas station on Ashland, where he stopped every morning because the owner, an old man named Pete, always asked about Emma by name. He told her about the year Emma decided she wanted to learn chess and beat him consistently within 4 months, and how he still hadn't fully recovered from the humiliation. He talked until the shape of her breathing evened out completely, until her head, without either of them quite deciding it, came to rest against his shoulder. Neither of them mentioned it. It was somewhere past midnight, Daniel guessed, since his phone had died along with everything else, and there was no dashboard clock left to check when Victoria's shivering changed. It had been steady before, manageable, the ordinary kind of cold shiver that came and went. Now it didn't stop. Her teeth had started to chatter in a way that cut through even the sound of the wind, and when Daniel reached for her hand again, it was ice. "Victoria." "Hey." He turned toward her, alarm sharpening his voice. "Talk to me. How are you feeling?" Fine." The word came out broken by her own shaking. "Just cold." "How cold on a scale?" "I don't know. Cold." That wasn't an answer, and the way she gave it, sluggish, slightly slurred at the edges, told him more than the words themselves did. He'd read about this in exactly the safety manuals he'd joked about earlier. Mild hypothermia didn't announce itself. It crept in through confusion, through shivering that didn't stop, through a person insisting they were fine right up until they weren't. "Victoria, I need you to move closer to me. Right now." "I'm fine, Daniel. You don't have to... This isn't about propriety. This is about your body temperature." He was already pulling both blankets around them, both of them no more separate portions, no more polite distance. "Body heat is the fastest way to warm you up, and I am not going to sit here being formal about it while you go hypothermic in a company car. Come here." She didn't argue this time. She let him pull her against his side, let him wrap both arms and both blankets around her, let her head tuck under his chin in a way that would have been unthinkable 4 hours ago in a hallway at Sterling Logistics. He could feel her shaking against his chest. Feel how fast and shallow her breathing had gotten, and for the first time all night, real fear moved through him. Not the manageable kind, not the kind he could talk his way around. "Stay awake." he said low and urgent. Victoria, I need you to keep talking to me. Don't drift off. I'm tired. I know. I need you to fight it anyway. Tell me something. Anything. What was your favorite subject in school? Why does that matter? Because I need your brain working, and questions make brains work. Humor me. History, she managed. I liked history. Why history? Because it already happened. Nothing you did could change it. Felt safe. That's a very you answer. A weak, broken laugh escaped her, and Daniel counted that as a wind tightened his arms around her. Kept talking. Kept asking. Kept her present in the only way he knew how. The same way he'd once talked Emma through a fever that spiked past 104, refusing to let her close her eyes until the ambulance pulled into the driveway. He didn't tell Victoria that memory. He didn't need to. He just kept his voice going steady and low, filling the freezing dark with anything at all, until slowly, gradually her shivering began to ease and her words came back clearer. Better, he asked after what felt like forever. Better, she admitted, and this time the word came out solid. I think you actually saved my life just now. Let's not get dramatic. I kept you talking, that's all. That's not all, and you know it. She pulled back just enough to look at him in what little gray light the storm allowed. You knew exactly what was happening to me before I did. How? Logistics manuals, cold weather protocols. I told you I read a lot. That's not it. Not really. Her eyes searched his face. You've done this before. Talked someone through something like this. Kept someone from slipping away. Daniel went quiet, and in that quiet, Victoria understood she'd found something true. The night Sarah died, he said finally, his voice flat in the way voices get when a person has rehearsed keeping them steady. I wasn't there. I got the call an hour after it happened. But Emma was in the ambulance conscious 5 years old going into shock, and a paramedic on the phone walked me through what to say to keep a kid from going under while they cut her mother's seatbelt 6 feet away. I've never forgotten a single word of that call. Not one. He swallowed. So when your shivering changed, I recognized it. That's all. I recognized it because I already lived through watching it happen to somebody I couldn't lose. Victoria didn't say anything. She just reached up in the dark and pressed her palm flat against his chest over his heart, like she needed to feel that it was still there, still working, still real. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry you carry that. Everybody carries something. Not everybody carries it the way you do, quietly, alone, like it's your job to make sure nobody else has to feel the weight of it. Somebody has to. No, Victoria said, and there was an edge of something fierce in it now, something that cut through the exhaustion and the cold. Nobody has to carry everything alone, Daniel. Not even you. The wind chose that exact moment to slam into the car with enough force to rock it hard on its frame, and both of them flinched, and in the sudden aftershock of adrenaline, neither of them quite let go of the other. Somewhere out past the guardrail, faint and rising and falling with the wind, came a sound that didn't belong to the storm at all. A howl. Victoria's whole body went rigid. Daniel. Was that coyotes? He kept his voice low, even though his pulse had kicked up hard. There's a preserve about 6 miles from here. They range wide in weather like this, looking for shelter, same as everything else. Are they dangerous? Not to people in a locked car, but I want the doors checked. He reached across her, tested the lock on her side, then his own, both solid. We're fine. Just stay quiet a minute. The howl came again, closer this time, or seeming closer, the wind playing tricks with distance, the way it had with the headlights an hour before. A second voice joined it, lower further off, calling back. Victoria's fingers dug into Daniel's arm hard enough to leave marks he wouldn't notice until morning. They can't get in, he said again, quieter now, closer to her ear. I promise you, steel and glass, we're safe in here. You don't sound completely sure. I'm sure enough. A beat. And even if I wasn't, I wouldn't tell you that right now, because it wouldn't help either of us. That somehow made her laugh, a startled, half-hysterical sound that broke some of the tension coiled in her shoulders. That's either the most honest or the least honest thing you've said all night. Little of both. The howling drifted further off after that, chasing something else across the frozen fields, fading until the wind swallowed it whole again. Victoria didn't loosen her grip on his arm for a long while after it was gone. It must have been close to 2 in the morning when Victoria noticed something was wrong with him. She'd been watching him without meaning to the rhythm of his breathing, the way his jaw had gone tight, the way he'd stopped talking as much over the last 20 minutes, and it hit her all at once, the way obvious things sometimes did. "Daniel, you gave me both blankets." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're freezing. I can feel you shaking against me, and you've been trying to hide it for the last 10 minutes. Victoria, don't." Her voice had an edge to it now, the same edge she used in boardrooms, the one that made grown men stop arguing mid-sentence. "You made me take care of myself an hour ago. Let me return the favor." She was already pulling half the blanket free, wrapping it around his shoulders, with hands that were still cold themselves, but moving with purpose now instead of panic. He tried to protest, and she cut him off with a look that needed no words. "You keep everyone else warm," she said softer now. "Who keeps you warm, Daniel?" He didn't have an answer for that, not one he was ready to say out loud. "Nobody, apparently," he admitted finally. "Not in 3 years. Then let it be me. Tonight. Just tonight." She settled the blanket properly, tucked it in the way he'd tucked hers hours ago, and then, before either of them fully registered what she was doing, she leaned her head against his shoulder again, this time not from exhaustion, but from something more deliberate. "Let somebody take care of you for once. I think you've forgotten how to let that happen." He didn't argue. He was too tired, too cold, too disarmed by the simple fact of being looked after, and underneath, all of it, something in his chest had cracked open in a way it hadn't in 3 years, and he wasn't sure yet if that was dangerous or the opposite of dangerous. They must have drifted, both of them, for a stretch of time. Neither could later account for not sleep, exactly, more a kind of suspended half-consciousness that the cold and the exhaustion pulled them into, despite every instinct telling them to stay alert. Daniel surfaced first, jolted upright by a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the coyotes or anything the night had thrown at them so far. An engine. Not distant this time. Close. Real. "Victoria." He shook her gently. "Victoria, wake up, I hear an engine." She came awake fast, disoriented for half a second, before the words landed. "Where?" "Behind us. Listen." They both went still, straining against the wind, and there it was again, the low grinding rumble of a heavy engine, the unmistakable scrape of a plow blade against asphalt growing steadily louder. "Oh my God!" Victoria was already reaching for the door. "Daniel, that's real. That's actually—" "Wait." He caught her wrist. "Let me flag it first. If I open your door too soon and it doesn't see us, we lose more heat for nothing." He was out into the storm before she could argue, flashlight in hand this time, since the flare was already spent, waving the beam in wide, desperate arcs toward the sound. The plow's headlights swept the road ahead, twin beams cutting gold through the white, and for one suspended, breathless moment, Daniel thought they'd done it. Thought the ordeal was actually about to end. Then the plow slowed, at the exact spot where the road curved away from theirs, hesitated for 3 unbearable seconds, and turned down the access road instead, following its route. Its driver either not seeing the flashlight at all, or mistaking it for something else entirely in the whiteout. "No." Daniel's voice cracked raw as he watched the taillights recede into the storm. "No, no, come on." He ran a few useless steps after it, snow up past his ankles, screaming its ID number. He couldn't even see clearly enough to shout, and then stopped, chest heaving. Watching the last red glow of its taillights vanish into the white, the same way the headlights had an hour before. Gone. He stood there a moment longer than he should have, feeling the cold claw back into every part of him. The flashlight run had cost, before forcing himself back toward the car, back toward Victoria, who had the door open despite his instructions reaching for him, pulling him back in. "It didn't stop," she said, and it wasn't a question. Her voice hollow with the same crash of hope and loss he was feeling. "It didn't stop." He collapsed back into his seat, breath tearing out of him in white clouds, hands shaking too hard now to be just from the cold. "It didn't see us." "Daniel, your hands. I'm fine." "You are not fine. You just ran through knee-deep snow in a t-shirt. Get the blanket right now." She was already wrapping it around him, her hands rough with urgency, checking his fingers, his face, the particular pale color creeping into his lips that made her stomach drop. For the first time all night, their roles had fully reversed. Victoria Hayes, CEO, the woman who signed his paycheck, was the one steadying him now, the one keeping him talking, the one refusing to let him drift. "Look at me," she said, echoing his own words back to him from hours earlier, and something about hearing it come from her mouth cracked something open in his chest. "Daniel, look at me. Stay with me." "I'm here." His teeth chattered around the words. "I'm not going anywhere." "You'd better not. Because I don't know how to drive a company Range Rover with a dead battery out of a snowbank, and I am not doing this without you." A weak laugh shook out of him, and she pulled him closer. Both of them wrapped now in every scrap of warmth the car had left to offer. And somewhere in that desperate freezing tangle of arms and blankets, something passed between them that neither one dared name out loud. The next hours blurred together the way exhaustion blurs everything. Not sleep, never quite sleep, but a long gray stretch where time lost its edges. They talked in fragments. They fell silent in fragments. At some point, Victoria told him about the summer she was 12, when her father took her camping, and a storm, nearly like this one, trapped them in a tent for 2 days, and how she remembered even now, 20 years later, that fear had felt different back then. Simpler, because her father had been there to be afraid for both of them, so she hadn't had to be afraid alone. "Is that why tonight feels the way it does?" Daniel asked. "Because you're not afraid alone this time either." Victoria was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "Maybe," she said. "I hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe." It was close to 4 in the morning when the second sound came, not an engine this time, but a voice, distorted and distant, carried strangely on the wind, the way sound sometimes traveled over open snow. "Do you hear that?" Victoria sat bolt upright. Daniel strained to listen. There it was again, unmistakably a voice, calling something that might have been a name, might have been nothing at all. "That's not the wind," he said, adrenaline cutting through the fog of exhaustion instantly. "Victoria, that's a person." He didn't wait this time. He was out the door before she could stop him, flashlight raised, shouting into the storm with everything his freezing lungs had left. "Here! We're here over here!" For a long, agonizing stretch, nothing answered but the wind. Then, cutting through the white, a beam of light swept across the guardrail. A real beam, steady moving with purpose. Not the wandering sweep of a plow that hadn't seen them, but the deliberate search pattern of someone looking specifically for a car. "Hello," the voice called again, closer now. "Anybody out here? We got a report of a vehicle off Route 20. Here." Daniel's voice broke on the word raw with two things fighting for space in his chest at once, relief so enormous it nearly buckled his knees, and something that felt absurdly almost like grief, like the ending of something he wasn't ready to let go of yet. "We're here. 2 of us. We're okay. We're okay." The light found him then blinding after so many hours of near total darkness, and behind it, the shape of a man in a heavy county rescue parka trudged toward him through waist-deep snow, radio crackling at his shoulder, already calling in coordinates. Victoria appeared at Daniel's side a second later, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, her hand finding his without either of them deciding it, gripping hard. "You folks all right?" the rescuer called, closing the distance. "We've had units out searching since your assistant called it in around midnight. Company said you two never checked in for a scheduled call." "We're okay," Daniel managed. "Cold, tired, but okay. Good, real good." The man reached them immediately, unhooking a thermal wrap from his pack, draping it over Victoria first, then Daniel, his flashlight sweeping over both of them with the practiced eye of someone checking for injuries he could actually see. "We're gonna get you both to the truck, warm you up, get you checked out. Ambulance is staged about a half-mile back where the road's still clear." Victoria's grip on Daniel's hand hadn't loosened. Not through any of it. Not through the walk back toward the flashing lights now visible cutting through the storm. Not through the rescuers' steady stream of questions about how long they'd been out, whether either of them had lost consciousness, whether the vehicle had any hazardous cargo. Daniel answered what he could. Victoria answered the rest. And through all of it, her hand stayed locked around his, like letting go might undo the entire night. Might undo whatever fragile, impossible thing had grown between them in that dead car while the world tried to freeze them out of existence. They were almost to the ambulance, its rear doors thrown open and glowing warm yellow against the dark, when Victoria stopped walking. "Daniel!" He turned. Her face, lit by the emergency lights, was pale and exhausted, and something else underneath it, something urgent. "Whatever happens from here," she said low enough that the rescuer already 3 steps ahead wouldn't catch it over the wind. "Whatever they ask, whatever gets written in a report, please. Remember what I asked you." "I remember." "I mean it, Daniel. This can't—" "Victoria." He held her gaze steady, the same way he'd held it hours ago in the dark, making sure she saw the truth of it on his face. "I gave you my word once tonight already. It still stands." Something in her shoulders loosened just slightly. Just enough, and she let the rescuer guide her the last few steps toward the ambulance, toward blankets and heat and hot coffee that would come later, toward a world that was about to start asking questions neither of them had good answers for yet. Daniel climbed in after her, and as the doors swung shut behind them, sealing out the storm for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. A paramedic pressed a thermal blanket into his hands and asked for his name, and somewhere in the middle of answering his coat recovered from the trunk. By one of the rescue team, was handed back to him, and out of the pocket forgotten. Since before the crash, his phone slid free. Battery miraculously alive at 6%, screen lighting up all at once with a flood of notifications that had been waiting for a signal that hadn't existed until now. 11 missed calls, 4 voicemails, all from the same number. Mrs. Alvarez. Daniel's stomach dropped clean through the floor of the ambulance, every ounce of relief from the last 5 minutes evaporating in an instant, replaced by a cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside at all. Daniel's thumb hovered over the callback button for exactly 1 second before he pressed it, his whole body gone rigid on the ambulance bench. It rang once, twice. On the 3rd ring, Mrs. Alvarez picked up, and the sound of her voice, thin, shaking clearly mid-cry, sent ice straight through Daniel's chest, colder than anything the storm had managed all night. "Daniel. Oh, thank God, Daniel. Where have you been? I've been calling for hours." "Mrs. Alvarez, what happened? Is Emma okay?" "She spiked a fever around 10. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids get fevers, but it kept climbing, and around midnight, she started shaking." Daniel, her whole body, and her eyes rolled back, and I didn't know what else to do, so I called 911. "A seizure." Daniel's voice cracked wide open. "She had a seizure. They said it's called a febrile seizure. They said it happens with kids sometimes when fevers spike fast. They said she's stable. But Daniel, I have never been so scared in my life, and I couldn't reach you. I called 11 times. I know. I'm sorry. My phone died. There was an accident. I'll explain everything later. Where are you right now?" "Northwestern Memorial, Pediatric ER. I'm coming right now." He ended the call, already moving, already trying to stand up in the back of an ambulance that was still rolling toward the county staging area, and a paramedic's hand landed firm on his shoulder, pushing him back down. "Sir, you need to sit down. We're still assessing you for exposure." "My daughter's in the ER. She had a seizure. I need to get to Northwestern Memorial right now." "Sir, I understand, but you're presenting with mild hypothermia symptoms yourself. We need to—" "I don't care what I'm presenting with." Daniel's voice came out harder than he meant it, raw with a fear that had nothing left in it for politeness. My daughter is 8 years old and she just had a seizure, and I was unreachable for 6 hours because I was trapped in a snowbank. I am not sitting in this ambulance 1 second longer than I have to." Victoria's hand found his arm before the paramedic could argue further. "He's right," she said. And there was something in her voice that made both the paramedic and Daniel look at her. The CEO voice, the one that ended arguments before they started. "Do whatever quick assessment you need to clear him medically, and then I am personally driving him to that hospital myself if I have to commandeer this ambulance to do it." "Ma'am, you're also presenting with, 'I'm fine, check him first.'" They checked him first. 15 agonizing minutes of blood pressure cuffs and pulse oximeters, and a paramedic shining a light in his eyes, asking him to follow her finger. 15 minutes where Daniel sat with his knee bouncing and his jaw clenched so tight it ached, picturing Emma's small body shaking on a hospital bed somewhere across the city, while he sat trapped in yet another vehicle, unable to reach her. "You're borderline," the paramedic finally said. "I'd strongly recommend transport to the ER for observation, but I'm not going to physically restrain you if you refuse." "I refuse." "Then sign here." He signed without reading a word of it. The moment the ambulance doors opened at the staging area, he was out scanning the lot for anything with keys in it, and it was Victoria, pale, exhausted, still wrapped in a thermal blanket herself, who grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a black SUV idling near the command trailer. "That's my driver," she said. He came out when Sterling's emergency line got the search and rescue notification. "Marcus, we need Northwestern Memorial right now, fastest route you've got." Marcus didn't ask questions. He just nodded once sharp and had them both in the back seat, and the SUV moving before Daniel had even fully processed what was happening. "You don't have to come," Daniel said, staring out the window at the storm still churning past. "You should go get checked out. You almost went hypothermic tonight, too. I'm not leaving you to walk into a pediatric ER alone at 4 in the morning after the night we just had." Victoria's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "You didn't leave me alone in that car. I'm not leaving you alone in this." He didn't have the strength left to argue with her, and some small, exhausted, honest part of him didn't want to. The drive felt endless, despite Marcus pushing every legal limit the icy roads would allow. Daniel's leg wouldn't stop bouncing, his hands wouldn't stop shaking, and not from the cold this time. Victoria didn't try to fill the silence with reassurances she couldn't back up. She just sat close enough that her shoulder pressed against his. A steady, wordless presence, the same thing he'd given her hours earlier, in a dead car in the middle of nowhere. When they finally burst through the pediatric ER doors, Daniel was already scanning the waiting room, already moving toward the desk, his voice cracking as he gave Emma's name. A nurse led him back at a jog. Victoria stayed one step behind, close enough to help if needed, far enough to let this moment belong to him. Emma was sitting up in a hospital bed when they reached her, an IV taped to the back of one small hand. Her face pale but alert, and the second she saw her father, her whole body crumpled with relief. "Daddy! Hey, baby! Hey, I'm here!" Daniel was across the room in 2 strides, gathering her up as carefully as the wires would allow, his face pressed into her hair, and for a moment he simply held her, breathing her in, feeling the terror of the last hour drain slowly out of his body and get replaced with something that hurt in an entirely different way. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't reachable. I'm so sorry." "Mrs. Alvarez said you were stuck," Emma said into his shoulder, small and shaky. "In the snow." "I was. I got out. I came straight here." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, brushing hair off her forehead, checking her eyes the same instinctive way he'd checked Victoria's hours earlier. "How are you feeling? Tell me the truth." "Tired. My head hurts a little. The doctor said I'm going to be okay." "You are going to be okay. I promise you that." A doctor appeared a few minutes later, calm and thorough, explaining what a febrile seizure was, that it was frightening, but rarely dangerous on its own, that Emma's fever had already come down significantly with the medication they'd given her, that they'd likely release her within a few hours, with instructions for monitoring. Daniel absorbed every word like a man drowning, finally being handed air, asking questions, nodding, gripping Emma's small hand the entire time. It was only after the doctor left, after the immediate terror had loosened its grip on his chest, that Emma noticed the woman standing quietly a few feet back near the curtain. "Daddy, who's that?" Daniel turned, and something in his face shifted uncertain for the first time all night in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "This is Victoria," he said carefully. I work for her. We got stuck in the snow together tonight." Emma studied Victoria with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of an 8-year-old. "Were you scared?" "Very scared," Victoria admitted, stepping a little closer, crouching so she was closer to Emma's eye level, the same instinctive gesture Daniel used 100 times a day. "But your dad kept me calm the whole night. He gave me his blanket. He went out into the storm to get a flare so someone could find us. He talked to me so I wouldn't fall asleep in the cold. Victoria's voice caught unexpectedly, and she had to clear her throat before continuing. "He's the reason I made it back to say this to you at all." Emma looked at her father with an expression that was somehow both proud and completely unsurprised, like this was simply the most obvious fact in the world. "He does that. He's really good at taking care of people." "I noticed that too," Victoria said softly. "Is he taking care of you now?" The question, innocent and direct in the way only a child's question can be, landed in the room with unexpected weight. Daniel felt his own breath catch. Victoria's eyes flicked to his for a fraction of a second before she answered. "He's taking care of both of us tonight," Victoria said carefully. "That's just who he is." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, already yawning the adrenaline of the last hours, finally giving way to exhaustion. Daniel settled onto the edge of her bed, and within a few minutes, she drifted into real sleep, her small hand still curled around 2 of his fingers. Victoria watched them both for a long moment, something unreadable moving across her face before she stepped back toward the curtain. "I should let you 2 have this," she said quietly. "I'll have Marcus wait outside in case you need anything." "Victoria." Daniel kept his voice low, careful not to wake Emma. "Thank you. For everything tonight. For staying. For not leaving me to do this alone." "You didn't leave me alone in that car," she said again, the same words from earlier like they'd become something between them now, a private currency. "I wasn't going to leave you alone in this." She lingered a second longer in the doorway, watching him watch his daughter sleep, and something about the sight of it. This man who'd spent the entire night protecting her, now bent protectively over the one person who mattered most to him in the world, settled deep and quiet in her chest in a place she didn't fully understand yet and wasn't ready to name. She was almost to the hallway when Daniel's voice stopped her. "Victoria?" She turned back. "Whatever this was tonight," he said, his eyes tired but steady on hers. "I don't know what to call it yet, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. Not to myself, at least." "I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to let me figure out on my own terms when and how the rest of the world gets to know about it. That's all I'm asking." He nodded, slow understanding more than he wanted to. Okay, she echoed. And then she was gone, disappearing down the corridor toward Marcus and the SUV, and whatever version of her life was waiting for her once the sun came up. By the time Emma was discharged that morning, cleared and stable with a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week, Daniel hadn't slept in over 24 hours. He got her home, got her settled on the couch with cartoons and dry toast, and only then, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, did the full weight of the night finally catch up to him. Not just the crash, not just Emma's seizure, but the 6 impossible hours in between the version of himself that had existed in that car, the version of Victoria Hayes he now knew and couldn't unknow. His phone, charging on the counter, lit up with a text. "Victoria. How is she, Daniel? Sleeping it off on the couch. Doctor says she'll be fine. Thank you again for last night. All of it. Victoria." "Don't thank me. Get some rest yourself. That's an order from your boss. Daniel." Copy that. Victoria. Daniel. "I meant what I said at the hospital. I need some time to think about how to handle this. Please. Daniel." "You have it. Take whatever time you need." He set the phone down, watched the screen dim, and something in his chest tightened at the word handle, like the night had been a problem to be managed rather than something that had actually happened between two people. He told himself he understood her position. He told himself it made sense. He told himself a lot of things that morning that didn't fully take root. Monday arrived 3 days later, gray and ordinary, and Daniel walked back into Sterling Logistics with a story already half assembled in his head: vehicle accident. Weather-related minor exposure, both employees recovered fully, the kind of clean, boring summary that discouraged follow-up questions. It didn't work. Frank caught him at the coffee station before 9 arms crossed eyebrows already climbing toward his hairline. "So the Range Rover's totaled?" "Ice storm got us on Route 20. 6 hours stranded. That's what the insurance report says. 6 hours Daniel in a car with Victoria Hayes." "It was a bad storm, Frank." "I'm not saying anything." Frank held up both hands, but the grin tugging at his mouth said otherwise. "I'm just saying, 6 hours is a long time to be trapped with the boss. People are going to talk. Then people should find something better to talk about. People at this company have never once found something better to talk about. You know that." Frank's grin faded slightly, replaced by something more genuine. "You okay, though?" "Actually, okay. I heard Emma ended up in the ER same night." "She's fine. Scared us, but she's fine." "That's rough, man. Real rough. Glad she's okay." Frank clapped him once on the shoulder and let the subject drop mercifully, at least for the moment. But Daniel could already feel it, the particular texture of a workplace rumor beginning to take shape, the kind that started small and grew in the spaces between people's actual knowledge. By Wednesday, the story had grown legs he didn't recognize. Someone in accounting had heard they'd been found wrapped up together by rescue crews. Someone in shipping was convinced Victoria had personally requested Daniel as her driver that day, which wasn't remotely true, but sounded plausible enough to spread. By Friday, an intern he'd never spoken to in his life gave him a knowing smile in the elevator that made his stomach drop straight through the floor. He saw Victoria only twice that week, both times in passing. Both times professional, to the point of coldness. A nod in the hallway. A brief exchange about a shipping delay that could have been conducted entirely by email. It stung more than he expected it to. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself she was protecting both of them. He told himself a lot of things, and none of them made the distance easier to sit with. It was the following Tuesday, nearly 2 weeks after the storm, when Richard Voss called Daniel into his office. Daniel had spoken to Voss perhaps a dozen times in 3 years. Sterling's chief operating officer, a sharp-suited man in his 50s who'd been passed over for the CEO position when Victoria's father restructured the company's leadership before his death, and who had never quite let go of the ambition that decision had cost him. Voss ran operations with cold efficiency and treated most of the staff, Daniel included, as functionally invisible until he needed something. He needed something now. "Close the door," Voss said without looking up from his desk. Daniel closed it. "You wanted to see me. Sit." Daniel sat, the first prickle of unease settling low in his stomach. "Route 20. Voss said, finally looking up. "The night of the storm. I've read the insurance report 3 times now, and there's something that doesn't sit right with me." "It was a bad storm, sir. The road was iced over." "I'm not questioning the accident, Daniel. I'm questioning the 6 hours after it." Voss leaned back in his chair, studying him with an expression Daniel didn't like at all. "You and Ms. Hayes were alone, unsupervised, uncontactable, for the better part of a night. And in the 2 weeks since I've noticed something interesting, Ms. Hayes has canceled 2 board calls she never cancels, and reassigned an acquisition review she personally insisted on handling just a month ago. She's distracted, off her game. And it started the exact night that car went into a ditch with you behind the wheel. With respect, sir, I don't see what that has to do with me." "Don't play dense, it's beneath you." Voss's voice sharpened. "I've been trying to get this board to seriously consider the Halbrook acquisition offer for 8 months. Ms. Hayes has fought me on it every single time, calling it short-sighted, calling it a betrayal of everything her father built. I need her focused, rational, and thinking about shareholder value, not distracted by whatever happened on that highway. Nothing happened on that highway that affects her judgment, sir. Then you won't mind telling me exactly what did happen? Daniel felt the trap close around him, slow and deliberate. We survived a car accident and a blizzard together. That's what happened. Voss studied him a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes. You're a loyal employee, Daniel. Reliable. I respect that. But loyalty has a way of getting people caught in the middle of things that aren't really their fight. He leaned forward slightly. If there is anything personal developing between you and Ms. Hayes, I'd strongly encourage you to end it now quietly before it becomes something the board has to discuss formally. A CEO's personal entanglements with subordinate staff are not a good look during an active acquisition negotiation. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I understand you're threatening my job, sir, in a fairly roundabout way. I'm not threatening anything. Voss's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm simply pointing out that careers can be very fragile things, especially the careers of single fathers who need the health insurance and the paycheck rather badly from what I understand of your file. The room went very quiet. Daniel felt something cold and hard settle into his chest, replacing the unease with something closer to fury. Are we done here? He asked, voice level despite everything simmering underneath it. For now. Voss waved a dismissive hand toward the door. Think about what I said, Daniel. Think about what's actually at stake for you. Daniel walked out of that office with his jaw clenched so tight it ached, and he didn't fully unclench it until he was 3 floors down, standing in the stairwell alone, hands braced against the cold concrete wall, trying to breathe through the sudden suffocating realization that whatever had happened in that car hadn't stayed in that car at all. It had already become a weapon in a fight he didn't even know he was part of. He found Victoria 20 minutes later, catching her just as she stepped out of a conference room, and something in his face must have telegraphed the urgency, because she immediately redirected them both into an empty office and shut the door. What happened? Voss knows, or suspects enough to make threats out of it. Daniel kept his voice low controlled, though everything in him wanted to shout it. He called me into his office, told me to end whatever's developing between us quietly before it becomes a board issue. Implied my job wasn't as secure as I thought if I didn't cooperate. Victoria's face went pale, then hard, in a way Daniel hadn't seen since the boardroom stories Frank used to tell about her. He threatened your job over this. He's trying to push the Halbrook acquisition through, and he thinks whatever happened between us is distracting you from fighting him on it. He's using it as leverage. Against both of us probably, but definitely against me. That son of a... Victoria stopped herself, pressing her fingers hard against her temples, breathing through something that looked like barely controlled rage. I told you why this had to stay quiet. This is exactly why. So what do we do? Pretend nothing happened. Go back to nodding at each other in hallways while he holds this over both of us. I don't know yet. Her voice cracked just slightly, the first real crack he'd seen since Route 20. I need to think. I need to figure out how to handle Voss without giving him more ammunition than he already has. Victoria. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice further. I'm not asking you to fix everything right now. I'm asking you to not shut me out while you figure it out. These last 2 weeks the hallway nods the emails when a phone call would have done it faster. That's not nothing to me. I need you to know that. Something in her expression softened, cracked open just slightly. The exhaustion and fear underneath the careful CEO mask finally visible again for the first time since the hospital. It's not nothing to me either. That's the whole problem, Daniel. If it were nothing, none of this would be nearly this hard. Before either of them could say anything else, Victoria's phone buzzed sharply in her pocket, once, twice, a third time, in rapid succession, the kind of urgency that made her flinch. She pulled it out, and Daniel watched her face change entirely as she read whatever had just landed on her screen, the color draining out of it in real time. Victoria, what is it? She turned the phone around without a word, and Daniel's stomach dropped straight through the floor. It was a screenshot a local Chicago News Facebook group posted that morning, a grainy photo taken from what looked like a dash cam or a passing plow, time-stamped the night of the storm. Two figures barely distinguishable in the dark and snow standing close together near a flare burning red against the white one arm wrapped protectively around the other. The caption underneath read, "Anyone know who this was? Found stranded near Route 20 during the storm. Word is one of them is a pretty big name in Chicago business. Somebody's got a story to tell." 342 comments and climbing. The office they'd ducked into suddenly felt too small, the air too thin, both of them staring at the phone screen like it might change if they looked at it long enough. 342 comments. Victoria said, her voice flat with disbelief. 342, Daniel, and it's not even 9 a.m. Nobody can tell who we are from that photo. It's dark, it's grainy, we're both wrapped in blankets. Read the caption again. She thrust the phone toward him, hand shaking slightly. Word is one of them is a pretty big name in Chicago business. Somebody already knows something, Daniel. Somebody talked. Who would even know to talk? The rescue team, the hospital. I don't know. That's what terrifies me. She was already scrolling, thumb-flying, reading comments faster than he could follow over her shoulder. People are already guessing names in the replies. Local business page, Daniel. This isn't some random Facebook group. This has 11,000 followers. Half of them work in finance or logistics somewhere in this city. Her phone rang before he could respond. The screen flashing an unfamiliar 312 number, and she answered on reflex, professional mask sliding into place, even as her hand trembled. Victoria Hayes. Daniel watched her face change in real time, the color draining further, her spine going rigid. I have no comment on that, she said, clipped and cold. I don't know where you got this number. Please don't call it again. She hung up, staring at the phone like it had bitten her. Who was that? A reporter, Chicago Business Journal. Her voice had gone thin. They already have my direct cell, Daniel. Do you understand what that means? Someone gave them my number, specifically to connect it to that photo. That's not a coincidence. No, she said slowly, something dark moving behind her eyes. It's not. The office door opened without a knock, and Voss stepped in. Phone already in hand, an expression on his face that Daniel could only describe as barely restrained satisfaction dressed up as concern. Victoria, glad I caught you. I assume you've seen the situation circulating this morning. I've seen it. The board's already asking questions. I've had 2 members call me directly in the last 20 minutes. Voss's eyes flicked to Daniel, lingering just a beat too long. I told them I was sure there was a reasonable explanation. A stranded vehicle, a survival situation, nothing untoward. But you understand how this looks, given the timing of the Halbrook vote next month. Richard. Victoria's voice had gone dangerously quiet. How exactly did a reporter from the Chicago Business Journal get my direct cell phone number this morning? Something flickered across Voss's face there, and gone so fast Daniel almost missed it, but Victoria didn't. I couldn't say, Voss said smoothly. Reporters have their sources. That number isn't public. It isn't on my business card. It isn't in any directory. The only people who have it are board members, senior staff, and my assistant. Victoria took a step closer to him, her voice dropping into something Daniel had never heard from her before. Not the boardroom voice, something colder, more precise. So, I'll ask you again, Richard. How did a reporter get my number this morning? The exact same morning, a strategically vague photo of me conveniently surfaces online right before a board vote you've been losing for 8 months. I don't appreciate the implication. I don't particularly care what you appreciate. Voss's jaw tightened, the pleasant mask slipping just slightly. I'd be careful with accusations like that, Victoria. Especially right now when your own judgment is already in question. My judgment is not in question, isn't it? Voss's eyes cut to Daniel again, deliberate this time, unmistakable. A CEO, stranded overnight with a subordinate employee photographed in what certainly reads as an intimate embrace, distracted enough in the following weeks to cancel 2 board calls and delay an acquisition decision that's costing this company real money every single day. It drags on. I'd say your judgment is very much in question, And I'd say the board is going to want answers whether or not you or I are comfortable providing them. Get out of this office, Richard. This is a shared conference room, Victoria. I don't need your permission. Get out. The word cracked through the room like a slammed door, and something in Voss's expression finally shifted, not into retreat, but into something colder, more calculating, like a man recalibrating his approach rather than abandoning it. He straightened his jacket, gave Daniel one last unreadable look, and left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him with deliberate, unhurried precision. The silence that followed rang loud in Daniel's ears. He leaked it, Daniel said quietly. You know he leaked it. I can't prove that. You don't need to prove it to know it's true. Knowing and proving are very different things when you're dealing with a board that's already looking for reasons to doubt me. Victoria pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, and for a moment, the exhaustion of the last 2 weeks was written plainly across her face, no mask left to hide behind. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Exactly this. The second there's a crack, people don't ask if it's fair to exploit. They just exploit it. So what do we do? I don't know yet. She dropped her hands, and when she looked at him, there was something new in her eyes. Fear, yes. But underneath it, a hardening resolve Daniel recognized from the boardroom stories, the version of her that had once dismantled a hostile takeover with nothing but a spreadsheet. But I know I'm not letting Richard Voss use one night in a snowstorm to hand him a company my father built from nothing. By noon, the photo had made it to 2 more local pages and a Reddit thread speculating about Sterling Logistics leadership. By 1, someone had cropped the image, zoomed in, and posted a side-by-side comparison with a LinkedIn headshot of Victoria that made the resemblance impossible to deny for anyone paying close attention. By 2, Daniel's own name started appearing in comment threads. He had no business seeing someone in his own department, apparently connecting dots he'd hoped would stay unconnected. He was at his desk trying and failing to focus on a shipping manifest when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Is this Daniel Carter, logistics coordinator at Sterling Reporter here, working on a story about Victoria Hayes? Would love to get your side of what happened on Route 20. No pressure, just want to make sure the story's accurate. His stomach turned to ice. He didn't respond. He forwarded the message straight to Victoria instead, hands shaking slightly as he typed. Daniel. They found my number too. I didn't respond. Victoria, don't respond to anyone. I'm calling our PR team now. Please, Daniel, don't say anything to anyone. Daniel. I wasn't planning to. But Victoria, this is getting out of hand fast. People at the office already know it's me. Victoria. I know. I'm handling it. Daniel. How? There was a long pause before her reply came through, long enough that Daniel had refreshed his email twice, checked the shipping manifest he wasn't reading, and refreshed his email a 3rd time before her answer finally landed. Victoria, I'm going to have to distance myself publicly, officially deny anything personal happened. It's the only way to take the oxygen out of this before the board meeting. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, something heavy and cold settling into his chest. Daniel. And what does that mean for us exactly, Victoria? I don't know yet. I need to get through this week first. Please understand, this isn't about how I feel. It's about survival, mine and the company's both. He didn't respond to that one. He set the phone face down on his desk and stared at the wall until his supervisor asked, not unkindly, if he wanted to take the rest of the afternoon. He went home early. Emma was at school. Still, Mrs. Alvarez wouldn't pick her up for another 2 hours, and the empty house felt heavier than usual, every room echoing with a silence he didn't have the energy to fill. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and against every instinct telling him not to. He typed Victoria's name into a search bar and watched the results populate 3 articles, now one from an actual Chicago outlet, with real circulation headlines, carefully worded to imply everything while stating nothing outright. Sterling Logistics, CEO's late-night rescue. Sparks questions amid acquisition talks. He read it twice. It didn't name him directly, referring only to an employee, but it quoted an anonymous source familiar with the company, describing the relationship as complicated and developing for weeks language that painted a picture far more scandalous than 6 hours in a dead car and a handful of honest conversations. His phone rang. Not a text this time, an actual call from Victoria. "Have you seen the Tribune piece?" She asked, no preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm reading it right now." That anonymous source. Daniel. That's someone inside the company. That's not a rescue worker. That's not a stranger who saw a photo. That's someone who knew details. Someone who's been watching us for weeks. Voss. It has to be. I don't know how, but it has to be. She exhaled long and shaky. "The board's called an emergency session. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. They want me to address it directly. Voss is going to use every second of it to push the Holbrook vote forward while I'm on the defensive." "What do you need from me?" "Nothing. I don't want you anywhere near that boardroom tomorrow. I mean that, Daniel. This needs to stay entirely on me. Victoria, if the story's already about both of us, hiding me from the room doesn't undo that. It keeps your job safe, which is the whole point." Her voice cracked just slightly, the professional armor thinning. "I am not letting you lose everything you've built for Emma because of one night I don't even fully regret." Something in that last phrase caught in his chest, sharp and unexpected. "You don't regret it." A long pause stretched over the line. "No," Victoria said, finally quiet and raw. "I don't regret a single hour of that night, Daniel. I regret everything that's happened since. But not that." He closed his eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Neither do I." Neither of them said anything for a moment, the silence full of things they weren't ready to say out loud, with a board meeting and a media storm hanging over both their heads. "Get some sleep," Victoria finally said. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "Victoria. Please, Daniel. I need to prepare. I'll call you after." She hung up before he could argue further, and Daniel sat alone at his kitchen table with a laptop full of headlines about a woman he barely recognized in the careful, clinical language of business journalism, and a chest full of feelings he had absolutely no idea what to do with. The board meeting the next morning stretched into a story of its own. One Daniel only heard secondhand hours later, pieced together from a phone call Victoria made from her car afterward, her voice hoarse in a way that told him more than her words did. Voss had come prepared. He'd printed the articles, circulated them to every board member before Victoria even walked in, framed the entire situation as a pattern of poor judgment. First, the insistence on personally conducting the site visit rather than delegating it. Then, the extended delay on the Holbrook decision. Now this. He'd painted a picture of a CEO distracted by personal entanglements at the exact moment the company needed clear-eyed leadership most. Victoria had fought back hard, according to what she told Daniel later laid out, 8 months of financial analysis, showing exactly why the Holbrook acquisition was a bad deal. Dressed up as an opportunity, refused to apologize for a car accident that wasn't her fault. Refused to confirm or deny anything about her personal life. Calmly informing the board that her private life was in fact private, and that she'd expect the same courtesy any of them would demand for themselves. It had worked mostly. The board had tabled the Holbrook vote for another month, rather than rushing it through on Voss's momentum. But 3 members had voted to authorize what they were calling an internal review of the situation. A review that would unofficially absolutely include a look at Victoria's relationship with a subordinate employee, however undefined that relationship actually was. "They want to interview you," Victoria told him that evening, her voice exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "HR tomorrow. Standard procedure, they're calling it. But I know what it actually is. I'll go. I'll tell them the truth. There's nothing to hide, Victoria. Nothing happened that violates any policy. We survived a car accident together. I know, but truth doesn't always protect people the way it should, especially in situations like this." She sighed, and he could picture her exactly pressing her fingers against her temples, the way she did when the weight of everything got too heavy to hold gracefully. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. If I'd just been honest from the start, if I hadn't asked you to keep quiet, maybe none of this would have snowballed the way it has. Don't do that. Don't rewrite the last 2 weeks like it's your fault alone. I agreed to keep quiet too. I understood why." "Did you though? Or did you just trust me enough not to question it?" The question landed harder than she probably meant it to, and Daniel found he didn't have a clean answer for it, because the truth was somewhere in between a tangle of trust and instinct and something else he hadn't let himself name yet. The HR interview this next day was exactly as uncomfortable as Daniel expected. A woman named Patricia from HR, professionally neutral, asked careful questions about the timeline of events, about whether any company policy had been violated, about the nature of his relationship with Victoria Hayes, before and after the incident on Route 20. Daniel answered honestly, kept his answers clean and factual, refused to speculate about anything beyond what had actually happened. It felt the whole time like being cross-examined for a crime he hadn't committed, and by the time it ended, he walked out of the small conference room feeling scraped hollow. Voss was waiting for him in the hallway, arms crossed, an expression of manufactured sympathy on his face that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "How'd it go in there?" "Fine." "Good, good." Voss fell into step beside him as Daniel walked uninvited, unwelcome. "You know, Daniel, I want you to understand something. None of this is personal. I have nothing against you. You're a good employee, reliable, hardworking. This is simply about what's best for this company, and right now what's best for this company is clarity. Clean leadership, no distractions. Is that what you call sabotaging someone's reputation? Clarity?" Voss's step faltered just slightly. "I don't know what you're implying." "I think you know exactly what I'm implying." Daniel stopped walking, turned to face him, fully done, entirely done, with pretending not to see what was directly in front of him. "You leaked that photo. You gave a reporter Victoria's number. You planted a source for that Tribune article. I don't know how you did all of it, but I know it was you because you're the only person in this building with a motive. That's a serious accusation to make without a shred of proof." "You're right. I don't have proof." Daniel's voice stayed level-controlled, though everything underneath it was anything but. "But I have 3 years of watching how this company runs, and I know exactly the kind of man who'd use a woman's worst night as leverage to push through a deal she's rightfully fighting against. I hope it was worth it, Richard. I hope whatever you get out of Halbrook is worth what you're doing to her." He walked away before Voss could respond, chest heaving with an anger he hadn't let himself feel fully until that exact moment, and it wasn't until he reached the stairwell. The same stairwell where he'd stood 2 weeks earlier, trying to process Voss's first threat, that the weight of everything finally caught up with him, and he had to sit down on the concrete steps, head in his hands, just to breathe. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "Victoria HR just told me about your interview, and apparently about a hallway conversation with Voss. Daniel, please tell me you didn't accuse him directly." Daniel, "I did. I'm not sorry." Victoria, "You could have made things so much worse for yourself." Daniel, "Things are already about as bad as they can get for me at this company, Victoria." I figured I might as well say what's true. There was a pause before her reply came, and when it did, it wasn't what he expected. Victoria, "Can you meet me tonight? Somewhere away from the office. I have something I need to tell you, and I don't want to do it over text." They met at a diner 3 miles from Sterling's headquarters, a place neither of them had any professional reason to be seen tucked into a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee, neither of them touched. Victoria looked worn thin, in a way Daniel hadn't seen even on Route 20. The exhaustion of 2 weeks of siege finally visible on her face, without any boardroom mask left to cover it. "I did something today," she said without preamble. "After the board meeting. I want you to hear it from me before it becomes another headline." "Okay." "I hired an outside investigator, a forensic IT specialist. I had them pull the phone records and email logs of anyone with access to my private cell number, board members, senior staff, my assistant, everyone. She pulled a folder out of her bag, sliding it across the table toward him, her hand not quite steady. It came back this afternoon. Daniel opened it. A printed email chain, timestamps, highlighted forwarded from an internal Sterling account. Voss's account to a personal email address that cross-referenced 2 pages later belonged to a freelance business reporter with 3 recent bylines in the Chicago Business Journal. "He sent your number directly?" Daniel said slowly, reading it again to make sure he wasn't imagining it. "Along with Victoria, this email has details in it. The timeline of the accident, the fact that you two were photographed together, even a line about canceled board calls. He fed the entire narrative to that reporter." "I know. This is proof, Victoria. This isn't speculation anymore. This is documented. This is—" He looked up at her, something like hope breaking through the exhaustion on his own face for the first time in days. "This clears everything. This exonerates you. This exposes exactly what he's been doing. I know that too." But her expression didn't match the words. There was something else underneath it, something heavier. Something that made the hope in Daniel's chest falter before he could fully feel it. "Then why don't you look relieved?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on its saucer, not meeting his eyes. "Because using this means going to war with Richard Voss publicly, in front of the entire board, potentially in front of the press, if he decides to fight back, instead of resign quietly." She finally looked up, and her eyes were bright, with something that looked dangerously close to tears. "And going to war means every detail of that night comes out in full. Not the vague, speculative version currently circulating. The real version. What we said to each other. What I told you about my father, about Michael, about feeling like nobody needs me. All of it Daniel laid out for a board and possibly a courtroom to pick apart. So don't use it. If I don't use it, he wins. He pushes Halbrook through, he undermines everything my father built, and he gets away with using a night that nearly killed both of us as a corporate weapon." Her voice shook now, raw and unguarded, in a way he'd only seen once before in a freezing car in the dark. "I don't know what to do, Daniel. For the first time since I took over this company, I genuinely do not know the right move to make." He reached across the table and took her hand the same way she'd taken his in the dark of that dead car weeks ago, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The diner's fluorescent lights humming overhead, 2 cups of coffee going cold between them, a folder full of proof sitting on the table like a bomb. Neither of them had decided whether to detonate. "Whatever you decide," Daniel finally said, quiet and certain. "I'm not going anywhere. I told you that in the car. And I'm telling you again now. You don't have to carry this alone." Victoria's grip on his hand tightened, and for the first time in 2 weeks, something in her face softened all the way through the fear and the exhaustion, giving way just briefly to something that looked almost like relief. "There's one more thing," she said quietly, and something in her tone made Daniel's stomach tighten all over again. "The investigator found something else, something that has nothing to do with the leak." "What?" Victoria hesitated, her thumb tracing an absent circle over the back of his hand. "Voss has been in private talks with Halbrook's executives for the last 3 months, she said slowly. "Before the board ever formally discussed the acquisition. Emails, calls, even a private dinner meeting I was never told about." She looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes now was a different fear, entirely sharper, more dangerous than anything about a leaked photo. "Daniel, I think Richard Voss isn't just trying to push an acquisition through. I think he's trying to sell my father's company out from under me. And I think he's been planning it since long before that car ever went off the road." Victoria's revelation hung between them in the diner, and Daniel felt the floor of the conversation shift entirely. This wasn't about a leaked photo anymore. Wasn't about rumors or hallway whispers. This was something far bigger and far more dangerous. "How long have you known?" he asked, still holding her hand across the table. "The investigator sent it an hour before I texted you. I've barely had time to process it myself." Victoria pulled the folder back toward her, flipping to a page near the back, sliding it across so he could see. "Look at this. 3 months of correspondence between Voss and Halbrook's acquisition team. private dinners. A term sheet already drafted Daniel before the board ever formally voted to even consider an offer. Daniel scanned the page, his stomach tightening with every line. This isn't just premature negotiation. This is him cutting a deal behind your back. There's more. Victoria's voice had gone hard, precise, the boardroom voice returning in full force now that fear had curdled into something closer to fury. Halbrook's term sheet includes a clause naming Richard Voss as incoming Chief Operating Officer of the merged entity. A 3-year contract. A signing bonus large enough that I had to read the number twice. He's not just trying to push through an acquisition. Daniel set the folder down slowly, understanding crashing over him in pieces. He's selling your father's company for a personal payout, and using our night on Route 20 as cover as a distraction so nobody looks too closely at what he's actually been negotiating. That's exactly it. Victoria's hands had curled into fists on the table. The leak, the reporter, the pressure at the board meeting. None of it was really about you and me, Daniel. It was smoke. He needed the board distracted by scandal, so nobody would ask hard questions about why he was suddenly so desperate to rush the Halbrook vote through before anyone could review the actual terms. So what do we do with this? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the folder, like it might rearrange itself into an easier answer. I don't know yet. If I bring this straight to the board, Voss will claim it's fabricated or taken out of context, or that I'm retaliating against him for the article. I need more than emails. I need something that proves the numbers themselves are compromised, not just the timeline. What kind of numbers? The valuation Halbrook's offering is built on our current asset reports. Warehouse inventory fleet, condition, distribution capacity. If those numbers are accurate, the offer is mediocre but defensible. If they've been manipulated somehow, undervalued, deliberately, to make the offer look more generous than it actually is, or to hide something Voss doesn't want examined too closely, that's fraud, not just bad judgment. That's something the board can't ignore, no matter how loyal anyone is to him. Daniel sat back slowly, something clicking into place in his mind. 3 years of quietly noticing small inconsistencies in the shipping reports he processed every week. Inconsistencies he'd chalked up to clerical error, never once imagined might be deliberate. Victoria, he said slowly, I might be able to help with that. She looked up. What do you mean? I process the fleet and inventory logistics reports every single week, have for 3 years. And there's been something off about the numbers coming out of the Northside warehouse for the last 4 months, vehicles listed as decommissioned, that I know for a fact are still running Route's inventory, marked as damaged or obsolete, that I've personally seen loaded onto trucks the same week it was written off. He leaned forward, adrenaline sharpening every word. I noticed it. I flagged it internally twice, and got told it was a data entry error both times. I let it go because it wasn't my department to push on. Who told you it was a data entry error? Voss's office, both times. Victoria's face went very still, and then slowly something like fierce, dangerous hope broke across it. Daniel! If you can show me the discrepancy between the actual operational status of that fleet and inventory versus what's been reported to the board and to Halbrook's due diligence team, that's not a data entry error. That's deliberate undervaluation, which makes the entire acquisition offer fraudulent on its face. I can pull those records. I have access to 3 years of weekly logs. Then pull them, tonight if you can. I need everything time-stamped cross-referenced with what's been submitted to the board. She was already reaching for her own phone, pulling up a calendar. I have 4 days before the rescheduled board vote. If we can build an airtight case before then, I don't just kill the Halbrook deal, I expose exactly what Voss has been doing, and there won't be a single board member left willing to defend him. Victoria. Daniel caught her hand again, steadying her before the momentum could run away with itself. If we do this, it's not going to stay quiet. This is bigger than a rumor now. This is a fight in public with real consequences for both of us. I know that. Are you ready for that? Because 2 weeks ago you were begging me not to tell anyone about a car accident. This is a different scale entirely. Victoria held his gaze, and something in her had changed since that night on Route 20. The fear was still there. He could see it. But underneath it now was something harder, something that had stopped flinching. 2 weeks ago, I was protecting my reputation. This isn't about my reputation anymore, Daniel. This is about protecting my father's company from a man who's been planning to gut it and sell it out from under me for months. I'm not hiding from this fight. I'm done hiding, period. The next 4 days blurred into something Daniel would later describe when Emma asked what he'd been doing every night after her bedtime as helping fix something important at work. A description that undersold by an almost comic margin the reality of spreadsheets spread across his kitchen table. Until 2 in the morning, cross-referencing 3 years of shipment logs against Halbrook's due diligence filings, building a case document that grew heavier and more damning with every discrepancy he uncovered. He found 11 vehicles listed as decommissioned that were still actively running routes, their maintenance and fuel costs quietly buried under different line items to keep them off the official fleet count. He found an entire warehouse's worth of inventory marked as damaged and written off that had, according to shipping manifests, he cross-checked personally, been sold at full price to 3 different distributors over the preceding 6 months. Revenue that had somehow never made it back onto the books in a way that matched the write-off. This isn't sloppy accounting, Daniel told Victoria over the phone, on the 3rd night, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and the particular electric focus that came from finally understanding something that had bothered him for years. This is systematic. Someone's been quietly skimming value out of this company for months, hiding it well enough that due diligence wouldn't catch it unless they already knew exactly where to look. Can you prove it's Voss specifically, and not just some mid-level manager covering for a mistake? The write-off approvals all route through one authorization chain. Every single one of them has Voss's digital signature on the final sign-off. Daniel rubbed his eyes, staring at the screen glow in his otherwise dark kitchen. He didn't just know about this, Victoria. He approved every step of it personally. Then we have him. We have enough to ask very hard questions. Whether that's the same as having him depends on how the board reacts when we put it in front of them. Victoria's voice, when she answered, had a steel in it Daniel hadn't heard even in the worst of the media storm. Then let's make sure the questions are hard enough that there's no room left for him to wriggle out of an answer. It was on the 4th night, less than 18 hours before the rescheduled board meeting, that everything nearly fell apart. Daniel was walking to his car after picking Emma up from Mrs. Alvarez's exhaustion, sitting heavy behind his eyes, when a black sedan he didn't recognize pulled up alongside the curb window, rolling down to reveal Richard Voss himself, alone, no driver, an expression on his face that made the hair on the back of Daniel's neck stand up. "Emma, get in the car and lock the door," Daniel said quietly, steering his daughter toward his own vehicle without breaking stride, not wanting her anywhere near whatever was about to happen. "Just a moment of your time, Daniel," Voss called, unhurried, almost pleasant. "I think we should talk. I have nothing to say to you. I think you do. I think you've spent the last several nights pulling logistics records you have no legitimate business reviewing outside your normal duties. And I think you should consider very carefully what happens to a man in your position who's found to have accessed confidential company data without authorization." Voss's voice stayed calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. "That's grounds for immediate termination, Daniel. No severance. No unemployment eligibility given the nature of the violation. I'd hate to see that happen to a man with a young daughter depending on him." Daniel felt something cold and furious settle into his chest, but he kept his voice level. Kept himself between the car and Voss's window, kept Emma's safety, the only thing that mattered in this moment. "Those records are part of my job function. I pull inventory and fleet logs every single week. There's nothing unauthorized about reviewing my own department's data. There's a difference between routine review and building a case file, Daniel. I have people who can tell the difference." "Then I guess we'll find out tomorrow whether the board agrees with you." Something flickered across Voss's face, the first real crack in his composure Daniel had seen. "You're making a mistake. Whatever Victoria's promised you, whatever she's led you to believe about your future at this company, that's not going to survive this fight, regardless of how it ends. Board members remember who caused chaos, even when the chaos turns out to be justified. You'd be doing yourself a favor by walking away from this right now quietly before tomorrow morning. I gave someone my word once in the middle of a blizzard that I wouldn't run when things got hard. Daniel's voice didn't waver, didn't give Voss a single inch. I don't break promises like that. Not to her and not to my daughter who's sitting in that car right now watching this conversation and forming opinions about what kind of man her father is. So no, Richard, I'm not walking away. Voss studied him a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his eyes before his window began sliding back up. We'll see how brave you feel tomorrow morning, he said, and the sedan pulled away into the evening traffic, leaving Daniel standing on the curb with his heart hammering and his hands shaking with adrenaline. He didn't have anywhere safe to put. He called Victoria the second he'd gotten Emma settled at home, voice still tight with the aftermath of the confrontation. He threatened to fire me. Tonight, outside Emma's babysitter's house with my daughter in the car. He did what? Victoria's voice cracked with fury. Daniel had never heard from her before, sharp and immediate. Are you okay? Is Emma okay? We're fine. Shaken but fine. He didn't touch either of us. Just made it very clear what he thinks happens to me if this goes forward. He's panicking. Something shifted in Victoria's tone, fear giving way to a colder clarity. Voss doesn't make threats like that unless he already knows he's losing. If he was confident in his position, he wouldn't need to intimidate a logistics coordinator in a parking lot. Daniel, this actually tells us something important. He knows exactly how much danger that evidence puts him in. That's a nice way of looking at a man threatening my job with my kid 10 feet away. You're right. I'm sorry. That was unforgivable, and I promise you it's going in the record I present tomorrow, alongside everything else. Her voice softened, real concern breaking through the strategic calculation. Are you sure you're both all right? I can send Marcus over, have someone keep an eye on the house tonight, if that would help you feel safer. We're okay, Victoria. I'm more angry than scared, honestly. But thank you. I mean it, Daniel. If anything like that happens again, if he comes near you or Emma again, I want to know immediately. You will. There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice had dropped into something quieter, more personal, cutting through the strategy and the fury to something underneath. I need you to know something before tomorrow. Whatever happens in that boardroom, whether we win this cleanly or it gets ugly, I am not going to let you or Emma pay a price for standing beside me in this. I'll protect your job with everything I have. That's not negotiable. I didn't do this for job security, Victoria. I know. That's exactly why I need to protect it anyway. The board meeting this next morning felt to Daniel like walking into a courtroom rather than a corporate conference room. 12 board members seated around a long table, Victoria at its head, looking composed in a way that gave no hint of the sleepless nights behind her. Voss 3 seats down, wearing an expression of practiced calm that Daniel now recognized as a mask stretched dangerously thin. Daniel wasn't invited into the room itself. He waited outside in the hallway, phone gripped tight in his hand, having handed over every document, every cross-referenced report, every piece of the case they'd built together over the last 4 sleepless nights. This part belonged to Victoria now. All he could do was wait. Inside, according to what Victoria relayed to him afterward piece by piece over the following days, the meeting began exactly as Voss had planned. A renewed push for the Halbrook vote, framed as a necessary decision to stabilize the company, after weeks of what he called distracting personal controversy. A pointed dig, aimed squarely at Victoria without ever naming her directly. It was when he called for a formal vote that Victoria stood up. Before anyone votes on this acquisition, she said, her voice carrying clean and steady across the room. I think the board deserves to see something. She distributed the folders herself, one to each board member, watching their faces as they opened them, watching the room's temperature shift in real time as they read through 3 months of correspondence between Richard Voss and Halbrook's executive team correspondence that predated any formal board discussion of the deal correspondence that included a term sheet naming Voss as incoming chief operating officer, with a signing bonus that made 2 board members audibly gasp. This is fabricated, Voss said, immediately, his composure cracking for the first time. or taken wildly out of context. I've had preliminary conversations, sure exploratory discussions that are entirely normal in. Then perhaps you can explain the second document, Victoria said, cutting through him with surgical calm, which shows 11 company vehicles listed as decommissioned on our official asset report. The same report submitted to Halbrook for due diligence purposes that were according to fuel and maintenance logs pulled directly from our logistics system, actively running delivery routes throughout that entire period. I don't oversee day-to-day logistics reporting. Every write-off in that report carries your digital signature as final approving authority. Victoria placed a third document on the table, and Daniel, listening secondhand to this part of the story, days later, could picture exactly the moment the room went dead silent. Along with an entire warehouse of inventory, marked as damaged and written off, that was in fact sold at full market value to 3 separate distributors, with the revenue routed in a way that never appeared on our official books. Richard, you didn't just negotiate a personal position with Halbrook before this board ever authorized discussions. You manipulated our own asset valuations to make this company look worse than it actually is, specifically to make Halbrook's lowball offer appear generous by comparison in exchange for a guaranteed executive position and a payout that would only ever materialize if the deal went through. This is a coordinated attack. Voss's voice had risen sharp with real panic, now cutting through whatever composure remained. Orchestrated by you and that employee you've been sleeping in cars with, trying to distract this board with a scandal of your own making. That employee, Victoria said, her voice going ice cold, is the man who spotted the discrepancies in your reporting 3 separate times over the last 4 months, flagged them through proper channels, and was told by your office twice that they were data entry errors. He has 3 years of clean documented performance reviews and not a single mark against his integrity. You, on the other hand, have 3 months of correspondence, proving you were actively negotiating your own golden parachute while claiming to act in this company's best interest. I'd suggest, Richard, that the only person in this room who orchestrated anything is sitting exactly where you are right now. The board voted that same afternoon, not just to reject the Halbrook acquisition, but to authorize an immediate independent forensic audit of every department under Voss's direct authority, and to place him on unpaid administrative leave pending the results. 2 weeks later, facing the near certainty of a fraud investigation that would follow him to any future employer, Voss submitted his resignation rather than wait for the audit's findings to become official record. He left the building on a Tuesday afternoon, escorted by security, and Daniel heard from Frank, who'd apparently been in the lobby at the exact wrong or exact right moment, that Voss hadn't said a single word on his way out. The story broke publicly 3 days later. But this time, it was Victoria who controlled the narrative entirely, releasing a carefully worded statement to the same Chicago Business Journal that had run the original speculative piece. A statement that laid out in clean factual terms exactly what Richard Voss had done and exactly how a diligent employee's attention to detail had helped uncover it. The statement didn't mention Route 20 at all. It didn't need to. By the time it ran, the story had transformed entirely from scandalous speculation about a CEO's personal life into a genuine business story about corporate fraud, narrowly averted the kind of story that made Victoria Hayes look sharper, more capable, more in command of her company than ever, rather than the kind of story that had nearly destroyed her 3 weeks earlier. It was a Friday evening, almost a month after the car had spun off Route 20 into a snowbank that had briefly threatened to end both their stories before they'd really begun. When Victoria showed up at Daniel's door, unannounced, a bag of takeout in one hand, and something that looked almost like nervousness on her face, an expression Daniel had genuinely never seen on her before, not once in a month of boardroom warfare and forensic audits. "I should have called," she said, standing on his porch in the fading evening light. I didn't want to do this over a phone call, and I didn't want to wait another day." "Do what?" "Be honest with you. Fully, completely honest, the way I should have been from the very first hour we were stuck in that car." She took a breath, visibly steadying herself, and Daniel realized with a small jolt that Victoria Hayes, who had just single-handedly dismantled a corporate fraud scheme in front of a hostile board, was nervous, standing on his porch, holding Thai food. "I spent a month asking you to keep a secret because I was afraid of what people would think of me if they knew I was human. And somewhere in the middle of fighting to protect the company, I realized I was still hiding the one thing that actually mattered most, not from the board, not from the press, but from myself. Victoria, I don't want to hide this anymore, Daniel. Whatever this is, whatever it's turning into, I'm done being careful about it in a way that costs me the actual thing I'm trying to protect." Her voice shook, just slightly more vulnerable than he'd heard her even in the freezing dark of that dead car. "I know it's complicated. I know I'm your boss technically, even after everything. I know there are 100 reasons this shouldn't work. But I've spent 9 years building a life around never needing anyone, and then I spent one night trapped with you in a snowstorm and realized I'd rather need someone than keep winning at being alone." Daniel stood there for a long moment, the porch light catching the same openness in her face he'd first seen hours into that freezing night. No boardroom mask left anywhere in sight, and something in his chest, something that had been carefully, deliberately closed off for 3 years, finally fully let go. "I already told my daughter your name," he said quietly. "She asked about you again last week. Wanted to know if the lady from the hospital was going to come around more." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I hoped so." He stepped back from the doorway, holding it open. "Come inside. Emma's actually finishing her homework at the kitchen table, and I think she'd like to see you properly this time. No hospital bed, no IV, no 6-hour blizzard survival story required." Victoria laughed a real laugh, the kind that had startled her the first time it escaped in that dark car, and it came easier now, lighter, like something in her had finally been given permission to exist out loud. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning that had nothing dramatic about it at all. No storms, no board meetings, no scandal simmering in the background. Daniel stood in the small office of his own newly launched logistics consulting practice. The first framed document on the wall, a signed contract with Sterling Logistics, as his very first client, personally championed by Victoria before the full board, who'd unanimously agreed that the man who'd caught Richard Voss's fraud deserved more than a coordinator's salary and a company car. He'd left Sterling on good terms at Victoria's own suggestion, both of them recognizing that whatever was growing between them deserved room to exist without an org chart sitting on top of it, and Sterling had become his anchor client instead, steady work with a company that trusted him completely, doing exactly the kind of careful, detail-oriented work he'd quietly excelled at for 3 years without anyone fully noticing. Emma had her own desk in the corner of that office, now a small one Daniel had bought secondhand and painted purple, because she'd asked where she did her homework most afternoons after school while her father worked, and where Victoria increasingly spent her own evenings. After Sterling's board meetings ended, still in her business suits, sleeves rolled up, helping Emma with fractions she genuinely enjoyed explaining, Daniel found her there on that particular Saturday morning, kneeling beside Emma's little desk, patiently walking her through a math problem, both of them laughing at something Daniel hadn't caught. And he stood in the doorway a moment, just watching them. The CEO, who'd once told an entire boardroom that sentiment was a liability, now utterly disarmed by an 8-year-old's stubborn insistence that 2 + 2 sometimes felt like it should equal 5. Victoria looked up and caught him watching. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." "Long enough for what?" "Long enough to know exactly how far we've both come since that car went off the road." He crossed. The office dropped a kiss against the top of Victoria's head, ruffled Emma's hair, as she groaned in embarrassed protest and felt for the first time in 3 years like a man standing fully inside his own life, rather than simply surviving it, one careful day at a time. They never forgot that night on Route 20. How could they when it had nearly ended everything before it began, and instead had somehow become the beginning of everything that mattered most? Years later, whenever the first hard snow fell over Chicago, Daniel and Victoria would find themselves, without ever quite planning it, standing at the window together, watching it come down, remembering a dead car, and 2 thermal blankets, and a whispered plea neither of them had understood the full weight of at the time. The night Victoria Hayes said, "Don't tell anyone about this," was never really about hiding a secret at all. It was the sound of a woman terrified to be seen meeting a man who had spent 3 years quietly, faithfully proving that being seen fully honestly without apology was never the danger she'd believed it to be. It was the danger of staying hidden that nearly cost them both everything, and it was the courage to finally step into the light together that gave them everything worth having in return. And that, in the end, is the whole truth of it. Real strength was never found in how much pain a person could carry alone in silence. It was found the night two exhausted, guarded people finally stopped pretending they didn't need anyone and chose deliberately and completely to be found.